I'm Peter Gluck with Gluck Plus Architects, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild, and today it's another episode of our wildly popular series, Children of Genius.
Children of Genius.
Again, we'll meet the families of famous architects, and we'll start with Jennifer Lapidus, granddaughter of Morris Lapidus, who reshaped Miami with hotels like the Fontainebleau. Next, Jacks Shreve, daughter of Arkansas architect Ernie Jacks. He worked on the Kennedy Center and the case study houses. Later, we welcome back musical guest Stacey Kent, one of the most noted jazz vocalists in the world. And now, here's your host, only known for one song, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Our theme song is, indeed, my entire musical career, besides a few random tunes from high school. Truly, I'm a one-hit wonder. Not so much the case for Stacey Kent, who you'll hear from later. She's one of the top jazz performers in the world, and we're super happy to have her back on the show. So I get asked, why does an architecture podcast have jazz guests? And we've had over 100. Well, architecture and jazz grew up together in the mid-20th century. Mid-century modern architecture and modern jazz peaked about the same moment, roughly in the period 1945 to 1965. Both stripped away ornament. Both trusted a clean structure and gave the audience the room to fill in the blanks. Architects working on the case study houses in Los Angeles played Dave Brubeck and Miles Davis on repeat. Blue Note Records hired designer Reed Miles to create album covers that could have run in a Herman Miller catalog. The two scenes weren't just neighbors, they were collaborators. Yet architecture is visual and podcasts, at least our old-school audio versions, are not. We think besides being great music, jazz has the restraint, light, space, and presence performers convey without a single picture. Jazz fans seem to love a story about John Lautner. Architecture fans seem to love learning about musicians they've never heard before. Mid-century modernism was never just about buildings. It was a whole way of living. The chair, the cocktail, the art, the lamp, the LP on the turntable, and that trusty shaker of martinis. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs and 6 other houses in California. By the E. Fay Jones Conservancy, preserving the legacy of modernist architecture in Northwest Arkansas. efayjonesconservancy.org. And by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
The Fontainebleau and the Eden Rock Hotels, designed by Morris Lapidus, are icons of Miami Beach glamour. He had a stellar career until fellow architects like Wallace Harrison and Paul Rudolph savagely criticized his work. But after quite a few years, he had a huge comeback. Today's guest, granddaughter Jennifer Lapidus, grew up in South Miami, captivated by the smell of bread drifting from the old wholesome bakery, and that pull never let go. She ditched law school and spent nearly 15 years as an artisan baker in Asheville, North Carolina, baking sourdough in a wood-fired oven, and then founded Carolina Ground, a stone flour mill that's quietly rebuilding a regional grain economy. Her book is Southern Ground. Here's George's interview with Jennifer Lapidus.
Jennifer, one thing I've noticed is that when people go to Europe, no matter how old they are, but the first time they go, they always come back and say something like, the bread here just tastes so much better than in America. And there's some scientific reasons for that. So why does the bread taste so much better in Europe than it does here?
I didn't expect that question. I thought we were going to talk about my grandfather.
We are, okay. But I want to open with a bread question since you are the bread expert.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, process is everything. And there's certainly something to be said for the old methods of production. What we do here at Carolina Ground, the flour mill that I run, is stone mill and make really high quality flour. And that's the very beginning of really good bread is high quality flour. So we cold stone mill our flour. And then most of our bakers, are leavening with natural leavening. And which is these days, everybody's doing sourdough. So this is no longer some fringe idea, but the method of slowing down and America, our landscape was really defined by industrial agriculture. In Europe, it's smaller farms and smaller production. I mean, not everywhere, but historically. Mm-hmm. So the modernization of agriculture really took hold in this country. And our flour mill, we produce maybe a couple 1,000 pounds of flour a day. That's compared to the average size flour mill in this country. They process at least 1 million pounds of grain a day. So
1 million pounds a day? Really?
A day.
Wow.
Yeah. So we are reclaiming this commodity basically and looking at it as an agricultural product of geographic distinction. We work with growers here in the Carolinas, organic growers, and a couple things in Europe. There is definitely a different focus on food that is very old. But I also would say when people say, I can eat bread in Europe and I digest it better, whenever people tell me that, I also do want to just throw in the hopper that we're also on vacation when we're over there. So we probably metabolize things better when we're stressed
more relaxed,
out.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, being a second generation American, my great-grandfather and my grandfather, came over from Odessa. The fact that I sort of turned in that direction, wanting to reclaim things that had been lost in what we deem as progress, I felt like we left some really essential things behind. I mean, the very beginnings of civilization was this discovery that, wait, this grain, the hunters and gatherers, it's suddenly holding on to it's not shattering and just, I don't know, it's probably a woman, but man noticed that this grass wasn't just letting go of its seed, that it was holding on to it. And so they gathered that and planted it. And that was the beginning of civilization. And there's, that was einkorn, the very first wheat. So I think that there's something very significant about taking notice of what have we done? The bread of life. I mean, for me, it was like that. Like, is this really food that feeds us? So I kind of turned back and looked at the old ways back before sourdough was so amazingly popular. I was wondering about leavening without commercial baking yeast, like in the 1990s. I started a bit ahead of the curve on that one.
Now, your grandfather, who was an architect, Morris Lapidus, he was ahead of the curve in many ways, too. How old were you when he passed away?
He passed away in 2002, so I was 31. Was I 31? I was born in 1969, so...
33.
Thank you.
There you go. So you had a long time to get to know him and what he was like. What was he like?
He was a great storyteller. I always liked to hear him tell stories. He would tell me how he sees the world, right? Like you've got to study people to be able to understand how to design spaces. It's not about just the design. It's about how they interact with the design. Those are concepts that, he would tell me within the concept of story. I remember him telling me that Frank Lloyd Wright called him something like an ant. And he thought, well, that's a compliment because that means I'm a hard worker.
Yeah.
It may have been a bee, but I think it was an ant. It was some very hardworking insect of some sort. But when I retell the story now, I'm questioning it. But I know that he met him, and I know that whatever he took from it sort of spoke to like his determination, because my grandfather was a very determined individual.
It sounds like he transformed Wright's usual insults into something complimentary.
Yeah, I think so.
Did you get to grow up in your grandfather's hotels, exploring those and seeing things like that?
Yeah. So my best friend, who sadly passed away when I was 13, but we became best friends the moment we met. We were 2 years old. And the crazy thing about this is I didn't really fully understand where the two of us were set on the stage of this story until later in life. But my best friend was Joanna Muffson. So her grandfather was Sam Muffson, whose brother was Harry Muffson. And Harry had been partners with Ben Novak when they originally hired my grandfather to sort of fix the Sanssouci. They didn't like the designs. And then Ben hired my grandfather to design the Fontainebleau. And then Harry and Sam had my grandfather design the Eden Rock. So my best friend moved to New York when we were in first or second grade. And so she would come, we would sort of spend a week at each other's, I'd go up to New York and she'd come down, and we would spend that week when she was in Miami at the cabanas and the Eden Rock, because the Eden Rock was this incredible place for a child. I mean, we would be walking in from the lower level and then up to the pool area. And I so remember the smells and the curves and the lighting, but there was this swimming pool that nobody ever swam in. It was the shade pool. It was kind of cold. It didn't get sun, and we didn't know why. It was just our playground. So in the bottom of the pool was this bar, and there was a big window, and you could see into the pool in the bar, but if you were in the pool, you couldn't see into the bar. So one of us would jump into the pool, and the other one would go down to the bar and see them, and then we would take turns. And I so remember, I mean, we were little kids, and watching Joanna swim, and then I'd run up, I'd dive in and she'd go down, and it was just this game that we played. And then, of course, the high diving board, which I never went off. I always went up to it, and then I'd go down the stairs. I was too afraid. But it was just such an amazing space to have adventures and to play. And I didn't know really that he had created that, or that her family was part of that. And, it was just there for us. And of course, we know now why that pool was shaded, because Ben Novak built the spite wall. Was it called the Versailles Tower, the 13-story tower, to shade the pool of the Eden Rock, because he was very furious that the Eden Rock was built next to his Fontainebleau.
Okay.
And that was then, a court case that they did not win, because the Fontainebleau had the vertical rights to build, but it was 13 stories, and there was no windows facing the Eden Rock except for one, which was Ben Novak's apartment. So
wow, this sounds like something Larry David would do on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah. There's a lot of crazy stories there.
Were there any other architects in your family, your parents or brothers and sisters?
Well, my uncle was an architect, my father's brother, and he worked with his father, so Alan Lapidus. And then my mom actually, she changed careers and got a degree in architecture. So my mom practiced interiors, but she had a degree in architecture. And then my uncle was an architect. He shared the firm with my grandfather, and then he, I guess, had his own firm eventually. But I always thought of my grandfather's work. He was very influenced by Japan. And so that was very interesting to me. That was sort of a different aesthetic. But I will say, I blame my mom, my family, for making me so sensitive to spaces. I was so lucky to have things where they should be. And now when I live in spaces and things just don't quite feel right, I'm very sensitive to that. Yeah.
Well, this is the curse of being an architect's child, really.
Yeah.
I have the same thing, because my father was an architect.
Okay.
So, I'll go into a place and I can't verbalize exactly what's going on, but I can tell you the vibe and sort of sense what's wrong with it at my uneducated level.
Yeah, and it's translated in an interesting way, because for the longest time, I launched this mill, and that was after running a bakery, and these little things that would come in that I'm now finally able to really clearly see. Our mill room, we have a pneumatic system that moves grain, and there's one thing to have mill, but to move the grain and to move the flour and to have a system that, actually works. All of that I designed with an engineer, and the fact that I was able to kind of translate that awareness of how it works in a space and how it doesn't work in a space ended up being very helpful in my career as a miller.
Your grandfather was really so talented. I mean, he even designed some ships, I understand.
I didn't know about the ships.
Yes, according to Wikipedia, which of course knows everything, he designed the TSS Mardi Gras and the TSS Carnival.
Wow.
in the mid-'70s.
It doesn't surprise me because I always felt like, especially the Miami Beach, like Eden Rock, Fontainebleau, always felt like being on a ship. There was something, I maybe it was just because of those curves, but it just had this sort of, I always thought it felt that way. I remember we would get ice cream off of the pool area, the pool that wasn't shaded at the Eden Rock, and it was this long curved space that just felt like you were on a ship. But another piece that I think is really interesting about how those things interface is I had a boyfriend years ago who saw a picture of a synagogue that my grandfather had designed in, I think it was St. Petersburg, Florida, or somewhere Tampa area. And he couldn't believe it because it was a space that he used to skateboard on. The roof comes down, and it was just this place that all the skateboarders would go skateboard off the roof of this synagogue that my grandfather designed.
The American architectural community, they were not fans of your grandfather, although people in Europe were. They really recognized his genius. In fact, I read that there was a meeting of the AIA held at the Americana Hotel that your grandfather designed.
Yeah.
Where Paul Rudolph, Robert Anshin, and Wallace Harrison just reamed your grandfather for his designs, which was, I think, a little uncalled for.
Especially within a building that he had designed.
And a professional setting, yes.
But, he also would say, I outlived my critics. And he would tell me about Gina. After my grandmother died, Gina would cook his food. And he's like, she's got me eating vegetarian and I'm outliving my critics. And at this point, he was on MTV. He was like in Interview magazine. And I'm, somebody who grew up in the 80s. I was like, cool, grandpa's on MTV. And in Interview magazine, like Andy Warhol's. I mean, so he became, even though we always had Architectural Digest and, in the house, and he was never those magazines, but we would get periodicals like from Europe that he was published in. So when I started seeing it, and then, of course, later, he finally did get the recognition that I think he really deserved.
Is it true that he burned about 50 years of his drawings?
Yes, unfortunately.
What precipitated that?
Wow, I feel like I'm the wrong one to ask that question. I mean, I think it was really painful to not be accepted amongst your own peers. He was classically trained. I mean, he went to Columbia Architecture School, which I got to say, we came to this country because of the pogroms. I mean, his mother very much felt like they needed to get out of Europe. He was born in 1902. So even getting into Columbia as a Jew at the time, I mean, he was kind of like very much the outsider. I mean, even though it was not easy to get in, to these spaces as a Jew. And then he was in Brooklyn, not in New York. So he wasn't a New York architect, even though he designed storefronts. He started out half his career was designing stores. And when he was in college, he was originally doing set design and then shifted to architecture. But it wasn't until he started doing hotels that he stepped out of that position. Yeah, all the criticism. I mean, when he was doing stores, he was drawing people into the stores. Like he would do these. My understanding was he was, the first to do this type of storefront where you're really drawing somebody in, where the storefront is all the way in the hallway. It's not just a one-dimensional experience. When he utilized curved glass, he utilized lighting, to draw people in like moths to a light.
When you were a little girl, did you ever ask your grandfather to sketch out a house for you?
No, I didn't. But he did design the super graphic in my bedroom. So my bedroom was, first it was orange and yellow. So this stripe that went up my bed and then diagonally across and around and down. And then my mom put Mary Mecco fabric like for blinds.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually I changed my colors to like gray and fuchsia or something. And that, but still the super graphic was this space that was in my bedroom that was sort of like this really cool kind of design. And then he designed the first house I ever lived in, my mom and dad's. We first lived in Coconut Grove, and then we moved kind of right outside of that in Miami. So, I did live in those spaces. And then in his apartment was just unbelievable. It was just all of these, for a little kid like me, I didn't talk much as a child. I'm such a tactile person, and there was so much in his apartment. Like, there were these plastic beads for curtains, and I would just spin around in that. And then there's like in the second level, which was where his art studio was, and he had a pony hair bar, so you could pet the pony hair. I don't think it's really pony, but it's some kind of animal, they call it.
Yeah.
And then all of these China dolls behind it that they had collected on their travels, or there were these masks behind the couch. I mean, all the furniture that he designed in that apartment, and the couch, the silk couch that had curves, and then the masks on the wall he had made, they were actually in my father grew up with them in their Brooklyn home. The floor, the marble floor that they collected the marble so that it was one specific vein, it was all one piece that was continuous. And in the bedroom, the mirror, you would just look at these mirrors and it was just this mirror of infinity. It would go on and on and on. Or going downstairs, the stairwell was veneered wood, like a birch of some sort or a lighter wood. And then there were these recessed shelves with lighting that came below it, and these blown glass figurines, like animals, kind of very modern, in all these recesses with these blown glass, different color shade pendants coming down. And it was just, as a child, like me particularly, it was very in her head, but quiet and very tactile. I was just such an experience. I loved, and the moment that we got off the elevator, my sister and I would race. We would race to their door, and their door was the very end of this hallway. And the door itself had the doorknob in the center of the door. It wasn't until years later that my daughter and I were in Paris. She was studying there, and I was going around Paris trying to find her an apartment because she was fully matriculated there, and everywhere where there's that doorknob in the center of the doors.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was really interesting to get to start to see these things that he had collected, that he had instilled in his spaces.
Morris Lapidus is an architect you're going to hear more about. There is a documentary underway called The Architecture of Joy, which will be out at some point in the future. Jennifer, thank you so much for talking with me.
Oh, thank you for asking.
That was George's interview with Jennifer Lapidus. Growing up in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Jacks Shreve never had to wonder what architects talked about. They were always at her house. Her father, Ernie Jacks, was in the first graduating class of the University of Arkansas architecture program. He worked alongside mid-century legends Craig Ellwood on the Case Study Houses and Edward Durell Stone on the Kennedy Center. Then Jacks came home to Arkansas to help build the Fay Jones School of Architecture into a nationally recognized program. He spent years trying to publish a manuscript of stories from his time with Ellwood, but never managed to get it into print. After he died, Jenny made that happen with Craig Ellwood, Remembering the Thin Man, in 2024, with fellow podcast guest Keith York. George spoke with Jacks Shreve over Zoom.
Most people, even devoted architecture fans, don't know about Ernie Jacks, but he's really like the Forrest Gump of architecture. He keeps showing up over and over and over again, and we're really happy to have his daughter with us today, Jenny, to talk about him. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, George. Thank you for having me.
Your dad just had this fascinating career. I first heard of him because of his association with Craig Ellwood, but then I learned he taught at the University of Arkansas. He was involved with Edward Durell Stone, just, on and on and on. So let's start at the beginning with your dad when he went to school at the University of Arkansas.
Well, they were in the fledgling class of the brand new Department of Architecture. After World War II, there were a lot of young, at that time, all men coming back from World War II. And there was a burgeoning need for housing, and especially affordable housing. So I guess the powers that be at the university saw fit to allow John Williams to take the little bits of architecture that were in engineering at the University of Arkansas and allow him to start a new program. So Dad and Fay Jones, who I know you're very familiar with,
oh, yes,
and three other gentlemen all were in the first class. Father graduated along with Faye in spring of 50, and he graduated cum laude. So his final studio guest critic was none other than Edward Durell Stone. So that's how things started. And Faye and Dad worked together on several houses while they were still in school their senior year. The Hants residence, the Musser Show Barn prior residence, and the Washington County Hospital. He worked with Faye on the first three, and he did the Washington County Hospital for Paul Young Jr. So that was back in the day when there weren't enough architects, and they were looking to students to design houses and other buildings.
Now, there's a funny story about your dad. He was called back into the Navy for a second time after serving initially in World War II. And what is this about a SEAL?
Oh, the SEAL, Henry the SEAL. So Father had left, he was a naval aviation radar technician in World War II. So that's what they had him come in to the Korean War as. He ended up at Kodiak. And, I've still got photos. He was in naval aviation. So in any event, he saw some hunters that had killed this baby seal's mother. And he took the seal and took it into the barracks and put a mattress on the floor of the shower. And he kept Henry alive and fed and wet on the mattress. And then when he was being transferred to Coronado, he passed along care of Henry to another naval aviator.
That's really great. So how long did this go on? How long was he a SEAL dad?
He was a SEAL dad for probably, I wish I knew exactly. I'm going to say maybe 6 months.
Okay. That's a long time.
It is, especially if you're a human and you have never cared for a SEAL before. Dad was a great, great, great lover of animals, and I certainly inherited that from him.
Now, after that, he went to work for Craig Ellwood in Los Angeles.
He did.
Which, in the beginning of Craig's career, Craig went on to become one of the most well-known architects in the Arts and Architecture series.
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, my father, I finally was able to publish one of my dad's books. He's written 3. This one is Craig Ellwood, Remembering the Thin Man. So it was about his time working for Craig, published by Modern San Diego about a year ago. And of all things, Mom and Dad ended up living in Case Study House 16 after it was finally completed. And there's some very funny stories in the book about Mom and Dad's life in Case Study House 16 as it was being shown to various clients.
So was the house built on spec and they lived there until it was sold?
Well, yes. Okay. That's right.
All right.
Yeah. Dad did end up on the very tail end of working, well, probably more project managing Case Study House 16 and then moving in. He also worked on Case Study House 17 in Beverly Hills, the Frug and Johnson houses in Brentwood, the Boberts house in San Diego, which was the only house that Craig's office ever designed in San Diego, and then the Courtyard or the Maypole apartments in Hollywood.
Okay.
Those were the designs that he worked on, but he also did project managing of other buildings.
In all the stories I've heard about Craig Ellwood, he was somewhat of a celebrity in his own right. It'd be like today if Brad Pitt rode around as an architect getting clients.
And I had the pleasure of meeting Craig myself in 1984 and saw him several times in the 80s as I was living out in California, and even visited Craig in Casa Novalta in Pergine Valdarno, Italy. I found Craig to be a wonderful person. And one of the reasons my dad really wanted this book published is to kind of set the record straight about what others have said about Craig. So that's sort of in the latter part of the book.
So what had others said previously that your dad set straight?
Oh, well, goodness. I think Neil Jackson, he approved of most of what Neil Jackson said, but there were others that had worked for Craig that claimed that Craig didn't involve himself in the design process. And, Dad was Craig's first employee, his first draftsman. But as Dad says in the book here, some of their assertions portray an almost sinister image of him. All this came as a considerable and very troubling shock to me. During the period when I was employed in the back bedroom Ellwood office, the projects were guided by Craig from conception to detailing and construction through his early schematic diagrams and a subsequent criticism process. Much in the same manner of every other architectural studio having a single dominant design figure with which I am familiar.
And this was unusual at the time because Craig Ellwood was not a formal architect. He was self-trained.
You are exactly right. And, Craig had a family. He was married to Gloria. Her stage name was Gloria Henry, also known as Gloria Ellwood. And I got to spend time with her also in the 80s when I lived in California. And he had a young son. So it was going to be impossible for him to enroll in a daytime program in architecture. So he was taking some sort of courses at UCLA, I want to say. He did those at night. And he was not all that unusual. There are other architects from that era that did not attend an architectural program.
After your dad worked for Craig Ellwood, he worked for Edward Durell Stone.
Well, he did. There was some time in between when he did some graduate work at the University of Oklahoma with Bruce Goff.
Oh, wow.
Because he had gotten to know Edward Durell Stone while he was studying in architecture, final studio guest critic, like I said, was EDS. He started doing projects under the auspices of Mr. Stone, or the boss, as Dad called him, in Little Rock. He opened an office for Mr. Stone in Palo Alto, in Fayetteville, which is where I live and where Father lived when, and Mother when they passed, and in Little Rock. Then after I was born, I was just an infant, and we got onto a couchette in a train here in Fayetteville at the train depot with a black cat, Popsy, and myself as an infant. We actually rode in a train couchette car all the way up to Grand Central Station because Mr. Stone wanted Dad to come and work in his Manhattan office. So there we went.
And he worked on some really exciting projects during his stint with Stone.
He did. The Stanford University Medical Center in Palo Alto, the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, which was originally named the National Cultural Center, International College in Beirut, the Gallery of Modern Art to Columbus Circle in New York, U.S. Pavilion 1958 World Exhibition in Brussels, Belgium, Football Hall of Fame, Rutgers University in New Jersey, Hotel Phoenicia in Beirut, the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi, India, the National Museum in Ponce, Puerto Rico. I counted all the projects my dad worked on, the designs of, and it's 99 altogether.
Nice. Those are some very significant projects.
Definitely. Yes. I know Dad, he probably felt like, my gosh, I came from this tiny place in Arkansas, and here I am, I'm just so amazed at his life when I look back on it.
The U.S. Pavilion at the Brussels World's Fair in 1958 is, if I could go back in time, I would love to have attended that World's Fair because so many architects from the U.S. were on display.
Yeah.
From my area, George Matsumoto displayed there. I believe Catalano, who did the hyperbolic paraboloid house here, displayed there. It was just an incredible time for architecture, and this was really starting the boom years for modernist architecture everywhere.
Yes, indeed. It was at that time when, as my dad put it, we were totally immersed in art and architecture and felt like that particular moment would never end.
How exciting.
Yes, it was very exciting.
After your dad worked for Stone, he came back to Fayetteville and the university and joined a number of others, John Williams, Fay Jones, Cyrus Sutherland, and others, in turning the department into the nationally acclaimed program it is today.
Yes.
And he became associate dean of the School of Architecture starting in 1975.
That is correct. There was one other thing Dad did in between the two. When he left Mr. Stone, who was not happy about Dad leaving, he worked at Holloway Reeves in Raleigh, North Carolina.
You're kidding.
No,
I did not know this.
Oh, yeah.
Holy cow.
Golly. So what they did there, I've got 10, I'm not going to list them all, 10 buildings they worked on.
Well,
there.
you got me intrigued now. Tell me the buildings.
Okay. General Hospital and Psychiatric Unit, Central Prison, Raleigh, North Carolina. Main Library, St. Mary's College, Cerebral Palsy Rehab Center, Catholic High School, Chamber of Commerce Office Building, Medical Arts Center, Presbyterian Church Complex, Cary, North Carolina, 4-H Camp Group, Chinquapin,
near Reidsville.
Chinquapin Plantation, Reidsville, North Carolina, Legislative State House Furnishings with EDS, Raleigh, State Capitol Mall and Landscaping with EDS, Raleigh.
That is really cool. I had no idea that he was here.
Yeah, he was. Mom and I joined him, and I went to preschool there. So
you probably went to Raleigh Preschool on Ridge Road.
Yeah, maybe.
We might have gone to the same preschool.
All right.
Holy cow. This is taking me back.
I know. But yes, you're right. John Williams. Oh, goodness. Cyrus Sutherland. Oh, Keith McFeeters. Fay, of course, and Herb Fowler. They were originally, the Department of Architecture was located in the Fine Arts Center, which Mr. Stone had designed. They loved being there because they were surrounded by all the other arts. Drama was there, the theater was there, music was there, art was there. So each of the disciplines could take a little bit of time off and go, the architects could go hear a symphony, or the architecture students could go in and see what was going on in the art studios. It was really neat that they were all there. All of those gentlemen that started the Department of Architecture there were practicing architects. So it's very different than now. There's a lot of architectural historians in a lot of architecture programs, and they were, one of the few that it was all people that truly practiced.
And the school in Northwest Arkansas was really kind of an unknown treasure for that region of the country.
It was. You're right.
I noticed that even today that people don't realize it's there, but it's been the ascension of Walmart and their spending that have put a lot of these buildings that were made famous by these architects and your dad on the map.
When I was growing up, Fay Jones was my, quote, Uncle Fay, and his wife, Gus, was my Auntie Gus. And, of course, for Cammie and Janice, children of Fay, the same thing. It was Uncle Buddy or Uncle Ernie and Aunt Needy. So the Jackses and the Joneses were thick as thieves. Fay was just a really creative genius, really expanded mid-century modern or modernism to kind of an Ozark philosophy with the use of materials that are found here locally, like limestone, sandstone, flagstone.
Your dad taught at the university for, almost 30 years?
Yeah, that's right. He was a design studio teacher, lecturer in professional practice, lecturer in specifications, mechanical equipment in buildings, illumination, acoustics, electrical systems, and vertical transportation.
That's a mouthful right there.
Yeah, I know.
So he must have trained Marlon Blackwell along the way here.
You know what? Marlon did not go here, although when Marlon moved here, I can't remember where Marlon went, but Marlon and Dad had a very, very special relationship. They used to meet down at the Roadrunner gas station once a week and go in and get Cokes, and then they would go somewhere and sit and talk. And Marlon has been gracious enough to host a Ernest E. Jacks a Distinguished Lecturer series at the University of Arkansas. It's now the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design. So, yes, they were very good friends.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
It is. Dad, when he had his practice here, also designed some buildings with various people, but he also designed some on his own. The Oscar Chambers residence in Fort Smith, Arkansas, that was designed and built in 1963 to 64. And then the James Patrick House, which was right next door to where I grew up, was designed and built in 1965-66. And both, before Father passed, were taken into the National Register of Historic Places. And Dad did, there's some kind of a manufacturing plant in Bikfaya, Lebanon, the Folk Cultural Center and Continuing Education Center in Mountain View, Arkansas. The two residences that I mentioned, he did several public housing projects, and Little Rock Air Force Base in Jacksonville, Arkansas. Looks like he did pretty much, I think 19. He had his private practice, but he was also teaching.
Now, your dad taught for a long time. What did he want to get across to the students? What did he want them to take away from his classes?
Well, it's kind of funny because I went to the University of Arkansas also, and I would meet people that were architecture students, and I was always a little bit afraid to say, my dad is Ernie Jacks, because he wanted to graduate architectural students that were ready for architectural practice. That's what he wanted. And he didn't do anybody any favors. He was known as the toughest professor, maybe even on the campus. But Dad always said that if the students are expected to be in design studio, I need to be there to help them. So Dad really took students under his wing, and he was, good friends with students after their graduations. I think someone said he could recall each student's name and where they grew up, what their hometowns were.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, he really took a very special interest in students. He wanted to make sure that if, they graduated, they were ready, and they were ready for actual designs that were going to be monumentous, and the stakes were high. So he was devoted to the students, but he expected a lot of them.
Well, anybody who would save a seal for 6 months has got something going on with them.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, George, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
With over 1 billion streams, more than 2 million albums sold, and performances in nearly 60 countries, Stacey Kent is one of the most beloved jazz vocalists of her generation. She met her husband and musical partner, saxophonist Jim Tomlinson, while studying at the Guildhall School of Music in London. Together, they've built a body of work that moves effortlessly between jazz standards, French chanson, and bossa nova. Barack Obama named one of her songs a favorite of 2025. Her newest album is A Time for Love.
Stacey, thanks so much for coming back on the show. This is your third time.
It is, and it's delightful to be back. Thanks for having me.
I have read that you have a fan. You have a very prominent fan. This fan has been president of the United States.
Oh, my God. Can you believe it? This was in December, and we were just heading over to Birdland to play one of our sets. And I got a text from one of my friends back home, and she said, she works at UVA. And she said, Stacey, congratulations, in case you hadn't seen this. And she sent me a text of this page from Barack Obama's, favorites
Playlist.
of the year.
Yeah.
Right? And he plays his favorite music and talks about his favorite books, just all his sorts of lists of faves. And I loved that we made it onto that list. Can I just say that the most exciting part was he didn't just pick any song. It's not like he picked me singing a Gershwin song or a Jobim song, although I love Gershwin and Jobim. He picked one of the songs that Jim wrote for me with novelist Kazuo Ishiguro, I Wish I Could Go Traveling Again. And so I love that the whole thing was very much in the family, that all three of us were in there together. So, and my band, of course. And yeah, that felt great. I'm still buzzing from it.
I bet. Fantastic. Let's hear the song. It's called I Wish I Could Go Traveling Again.
Wish I could go traveling again. It feels like this summer will never end. And I've had such good offers from several of my friends. I wish I could go traveling again. I wish I could go traveling. I wanna sit in my shade, sipping my latte beneath the awning of a famous cafe, jet-lagged and with our luggage gone astray. I wish I could go traveling again. I want a waiter to give us a reprimand in a language neither of us understand, while we argue about the customs of the land. I wish I could go traveling again. I wanna sit in traffic, anxious about our plane, while your blasé comments drive me half insane. I wanna dash for shelter with you through the tropical rain. I wish I could go traveling again. I wanna be awakened by faulty fire alarm in an overpriced hotel devoid of charm, then fall asleep again back in your arms. I wish I could go traveling again. But how can I ever go traveling again when I know I'll just keep remembering again, when I know I'll just be gathering again reminders to break my heart. I wish I could go traveling again. It feels like this summer will never end. And I've had such good offers from several of my friends. I wish I could go traveling again.
Stacey, I can see why that would make somebody's playlist. It really is a beautiful sentiment.
It is. Do you know what's interesting is that every once in a while, not a lot, but sometimes we will revisit songs that we recorded once. And then, the years go by and you go, I need to revisit this. I'm the same. The sensibility is the same, but something has shifted. And I just feel like I want to express this differently. That happened with I Wish I Could Go Traveling Again. And it's multi-layered because it wasn't just me who wanted to play it again. We've been playing it over the years, and it transforms. It kind of morphs into something else as you grow up and older. But when COVID hit and, we were all locked down, this isn't something we talk about so much anymore, right? It's kind of behind us, but it's still present, right? For those of us who were lucky. But the fans who reach out to me on social media asked for that song more than any other song that they asked for. Because, they were coming to artists at home.
Yeah.
And, people were looking for community and something uplifting. And so musicians definitely came out and did a lot of things, from home. And I kept getting requests for that song. And of course, the sentiment can work anytime, any place, right? That sort of sense of, just longing, something's missing. But here it became kind of literal too, because people wished they could get out again, locked in. And we had so many requests for it that Jim and Art and I thought, oh, you know what? Let's sit down and do that again. So Jim rearranged it. And the sentiment was just different, something more intense. It was always wonderfully intense, but this had a layer of kind of frustrated longing to it that was also sort of delicious. And I loved it. So I was very grateful to the fans for pushing me in that direction.
You've got a new album out. It's called A Time for Love. How did that come about?
Yeah. When Jim and Art and I made our record, which I think I discussed with you a couple of years back, called Songs from Other Places, which was our first trio record. We made lots of records with 5-piece, 6-piece, 9-piece, 60-piece. We did the orchestral. We weren't 60, we were 59, but nevertheless, you get the picture.
Yeah. No one's going to check, Stacey.
No, but I wanted to be right there precise. So Jim and Art and I have such a great relationship. I mean, you know what it's like, and all your listeners do too. Life is about great chemistry, whether it's two friends or partners at work or artists, whatever it is, you've got to have that great dialogue. And Jim and Art and I have such great dialogue and understanding, which is why it's very special to go out as just the trio, because it's very bare, and yet it's so full. It's magnificently full. I mean, it's one of my favorite collaborations of just the three of us, because you're so naked, and yet you hear everything. You hear nothing is overlaying anything else. And so the three of us have this collective voice and our own individual voices. It's something extraordinary for me. Anyway, when we made Songs from Other Places in 2022, I guess, we said to each other, we're not done. We knew we had more to say and more to do as just the trio. And when I signed the newest deal with my present record label for these next 4 records, we already know, I'm not going to tell everybody because I don't want to give it away. It's nice to have a surprise, but we already know what we're doing for the next 4. And we said to them, you know what? Let's slot this one in first, because Jim and Art and I were very hungry to put this record together. So it has the same kind of feeling of the camaraderie of the three of us and that intimacy and that intensity. But the songs have led it in a different direction, and it felt different to us. So I really loved making this record. And I will say to you, George, I'm not done. I don't think the three of us are done. I think there will be a part 3 to this, not next year, in a few years' time.
Right.
But it's exciting that there's just this kind of feeling of not quite sated. We still have more to go. So that's how the record came about. And some of it was very planned, and some of it was more spur. We would be at sound checks and we'd start playing around because we're checking the sound, and we'd go, hey, that sounds good. That feels good. So some of it was put together in a kind of impromptu way. Those are things I'd like to talk about, as we go along, as we're touring, because you realize you're making it up as you go along. You have an idea, but, Art might play some intro on the piano that makes you think of another song, and you go, hey, what about this?
Yeah.
It's so much fun to just leave the path and the door open. You don't quite know where it's going to go.
Exactly. It's an adventure.
It is an adventure.
One of the things I love about your voice is it's so clear. I mean, it's unusually clear. I can hear you from across the house singing, and I know exactly every word that's coming out, which makes it quite beautiful.
Thank you for saying that. I think that there's something to this. You can't help what your personality is. You just kind of grow and develop, and your sensibility is your sensibility, right? You have this way. I was a kid with a huge, tremendous desire to communicate. And I think that probably fed into how I developed my way of speaking and my way of singing. And it wasn't just a one-way street. It wasn't just me to the ear of the person listening. It was also back. For those who are tuned in who don't necessarily know the beginnings of my story, I came to music a little bit later because I was a student in language and literature and poetry. And I think
at
that
the
my
venerable
language
Sarah
studies,
Lawrence College.
Sarah Lawrence, and every summer at Middlebury. I've done 10 summers at Middlebury Summer School language immersion. And I want you to know that I am not alone. So at SLC, at Sarah Lawrence, they had language programs, but it was just a general liberal arts program. But you found me in the language department a lot, and I went abroad a lot. And I spent my summers at Middlebury in their immersion program where you would sign an oath to give up English for the 7 weeks that you were there and just speak that language you're developing. And then whenever we would go away, I was just very tuned into how people were speaking, their inflections, what different things happened in different languages in terms of their expression. And some of that is muscular. You listen to French people and they're very much at to the mouth. And so it gives them a certain attitude that they have that then the Italians are different or the Portuguese are different because of this. And I realized how much is going on in the throat and the mouth and the tongue. And it's not a lot that we talk about as singers in an interview. You might talk about, your band and your repertoire and your approach and your practicing habits and all those kinds of things. But we should take a moment to just talk about muscles and muscularity and how it is that we develop. And it makes you express yourself in a particular way. And I think that I had so much fun doing this. I will say one other thing as a footnote to this. So I grew up with a grandfather who grew up in France. And so French was a second language in my house. So I grew up very lucky because I grew up pretty much bilingual.
Yes.
That is a great gift. And it gave me so much excitement. And it pleased my grandfather so much to speak with me in French that it really inspired me to do better at my studies, do more, because I wanted to please my grandpa, 60 years older than I was. To communicate with him. It kills me now that he's not here. I love talking to this man. That's the same for all of us. We lose our grandparents. We look to see them as adults. But that communication between us was so vital to my development. And so that was a long-winded way of coming back to what you said about the clarity. I think I can't help the clarity because I think I had such a desire to communicate and understand people.
And the clarity is there not just in English, folks, but in French. If you listen to some of the French songs that Stacey sings, it's like if you didn't know who it was, you would think, oh, this is some French musician.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. This next song is from the new album, A Time for Love. It was written by Johnny Mandel and Paul Francis Webster for the 1965 film The Sandpiper, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, who had their own torrid love affair going on at the time. This show was about a bittersweet affair between Taylor's free-spirited artist and Burton's married Episcopal minister, set in Big Sur, California. In 1966, it won the Oscar for Best Original Song, as well as the Grammy Song of the Year. Tony Bennett's recording became the most iconic version, until now, of course, and it's a touchstone of the 1960s. Here's Stacey with Shadow of Your Smile.
One day we walked along the sands, one day in early spring. You held a piper in your hand to mend its broken wing. Now I remember many a day and many a lonely mile, the echo of a piper your song, the shadow of your smile, the shadow of your smile. When you are gone, will color all my dreams and light the dawn. Look into my eyes, my love, and see all the lovely things you are to me. Our wistful little star was far too high. A teardrop kissed your lips, and so did I. Now when I remember spring, all the joy that love can bring, I will be remembering the shadow of your smile. Wistful little star was far too high. A teardrop kissed your lips, and so did I. Now when I remember spring, all the joy that love can bring, I will be remembering the shadow of your smile.
You and your husband, Jim, travel a lot. You're gone, what, 6 months a year somewhere?
It used to be 6, and now we are winding it down to something less than that. Yeah, we travel a lot. We are trying to travel less so that we get more home time.
Yeah.
Because we were missing home time. I mean, we love it out there. One of the dangers of working with your best friend is that you don't necessarily have the discipline to say to your agent, oh, I'm going to take this time off because I'm going to watch my kids attend perform in an ice skating.
Yeah. I got a soccer game to go to.
Exactly. I mean, we were out there. My life was on the road because my life was wherever he was, and we could be on the road. But we realized that something was missing, like, growing veggies in our garden and nesting at the house. And so we're trying to get a good balance. But I love working with him. And when we're home, we're working all the time. I mean, we're either coming up with new repertoire or we're recording because we have a studio at home. The music does go on behind the scenes as well.
Now, you are a client of an architect now. You're designing a new house?
Yes.
Tell me about the new house.
A lot of people will know this. We were in Colorado for many, many years, and we loved it. And we were such mountain people. The sadder part of the story, but it has a happy ending, was that we kept getting evacuated because of the fires. And so we thought, you know what? We got to go find some mountains where it's wetter, because it was really very fight or flight watching the fires from our window, and sleeping down in the community gym with other, with our neighbors and stuff. And so we decided to leave. A lot of people stayed. But we ended up coming further east. We got in the car and we drove 2,000 miles. We didn't know where we were going. And we kind of put a pin in the map. We wanted a college town. We had things on the checklist. So we ended up just outside of Charlottesville. And we found this house on this great plot. But the house was terrible. Terrible. But the plot was so good. So we thought, all right, we'll take on a fixer-upper. So this is really fun to talk to you about, because this is your catchment, right?
Yeah.
So we lived in the house for a little while, and we tossed and turned. What do? Do we find a better house? No, we love the plot. Do we knock it all down? No, that's too drastic. But what happened in this house was, it was built in the early 80s, and we're not quite sure what the design concept or whose concept it was. But I think they thought it was a good idea at the time. We're on a big hill, so it's 3 stories, and it's built into the hill, which has its benefits. But in order to get up and down from the house, they built this gargantuan staircase in the center of the house that was so big and took up so much room that all the other rooms around it just felt like little warrens around the house. There were a million 45-degree angles. So as soon as you walked in the front door, you were hit with this very uncomfortable feeling of this 45-degree, and it continued all the way through the house. It was weird to have that much square footage. It was like 4,000 square foot, and feel that claustrophobic. So we worked with an architect. We realized that there was nothing you could do except take out the central core. We knocked down the staircase. We put in a reasonable staircase to the upstairs from the main floor, and then we pushed out the lower level out on one of the hills, and we made another staircase. So now you have 2 separate staircases to go to the top floor or to downstairs into the sub. It's not really a basement because it does walk out, but a sub-level. And suddenly that square footage feels like twice the size. I mean, it's just leaped out with space. Not that you want to overdo it. One thing I want to say about space that I find so interesting, when we moved from Colorado, where there was so much space and everybody built outwards in ranch style because you could afford to, because land was less expensive and you had all that vast land. But what people ended up doing was they would overstate their needs for the size. We would go into friends' houses and they just were colossal living rooms and very uncomfortable. We lived in one of our favorite houses in that valley in Colorado because everything was just a little cozier. The ceilings were just dropped a little bit. And if we had an angle up, for a little bit cathedral ceiling, at least it was done in a nice architectural way. It had a good feel to it.
Yeah.
You see, you get the picture. We were so claustro. We didn't want to overdo it. We only pushed out a little. But without that staircase, we have just gained a world. And so it was a whirlwind of a design, because now that we've knocked out this whole middle section, everything had to be addressed. But the outside remains the same. The bones of the house were great. But you cannot imagine how happy we are. And then when that extra room outside, now because of the new staircase to the sub-level, we made a garage into the studio and built a new garage. And suddenly we have absolutely everything we want. A garage, a studio for Jim, a studio for me, good soundproofing between the two of us so we can make as much noise as we want.
Excellent.
So that's the full story that you just got there.
I love that. I love that. When do you think you're going to move in?
In August.
In August. Oh, cool. Well, next time you come on the show, we're going to have to hear all about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really fun to talk to you guys who are such, design lovers and architect lovers, because you walk around the space going, this is such a conundrum. What do we do? The architect that we're working with plays piano as well, and he loves music, and we really share an aesthetic of the world in general. We send him pictures from the house of the light, because the light in Virginia is so beautiful, coming in and splashing in the wall, and he'll write back and say, oh, in praise of shadows. And suddenly we're all reading in praise of shadows. And, just fun things like that are mixing our business, our, work, music with our home. I would say the two are very much intertwined. And that makes the whole process so delightful.
We might call that harmony. Stacey, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's so much fun to talk to you every single time.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by the Brent R. Harris Charitable Trust, restorer of Richard Neutra's Kaufman Desert House in Palm Springs, and 6 other houses in California, by the E. Jones Conservancy, preserving the legacy of modernist architecture in Northwest Arkansas, efjonesconservancy.org, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Palm Springs, Toronto, Malibu, and Los Angeles.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 25,000 significant modernist houses, and access 5 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with guest research by Bobby Morris. Got a guest to suggest for the show? Write her at bobby@usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another cleanly structured, melodic edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
All the cool kids will be here.